Now let's get reaction on that ActionSA briefing now from political analyst Ongama Mtimka. Ongama, thank you very much for your time. Now, I'm not quite sure what era of politics we've entered now. You have ActionSA saying it's not desperate for coalitions. The ANC is not desperate for coalitions. We know the position of the EFF. They've been consistent. They're not desperate. What does this really mean for ordinary citizens who just want services?
Good afternoon to you, Mfundo, and your viewers. So this is part of the strategic framing that political parties are doing in order to convey the message to their potential suitors that they've got a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And that's important when you negotiate with others, because if there's a perception that you stand to lose more, then the balance of power will not be equitable, and the other players to the negotiating table will actually attempt to outsmart the other. So I think this is part of the posturing. It's quite interesting that the ActionSA have had a participatory approach in terms of which they have been able to assess what the attitude is of not the party's rank and file, but generally some broader members of the public about what coalitions to be involved in. It's quite interesting. We're beginning to see a lot more sensitivity to what the voters will say when it comes to coalition agreements. It's quite an interesting period in terms of which the political is realizing its vulnerability to electorate. And we see this degree of care and sensitivity to what may be electoral concerns in approaching coalition discussions.
But speaking of the posturing that you mentioned and just this tough speak, I mean, what good is posturing when we know the numbers? Because they decide how much of a voice you can in fact have.
Indeed. So I think that in the end, between the idealism that we are hearing and the pragmatic choices that each of these players are going to face in each municipal council, we are going to see a lot of pushing, especially at a local level, where you find that a particular national position is being challenged by politicians in a specific municipal setting based on the limitations, among them the one you are highlighting, of numbers in that specific municipality. So notwithstanding the posturing, I think what will win the day are pragmatic considerations about the specifics of each of the municipalities. And in order to be truly forward-moving, political parties at a national level should have a degree of openness to being guided by their counterparts acting within a context of a municipal setting. Because what you will find, Fundo, is that because politicians are acting within a local context, they tend to have warmer relationships across the party line compared to their national counterparts. And it's going to be important that while national strategy is key, that local dynamics are factored in, and those leading at a national level show a degree of openness about what the possibilities are in each specific municipality.
I suppose Hermanns Mashaba then has a good record when it comes to that openness. He does participate and listen to his political opponents. But there's been a lot of criticism against the ActionSA. Many have said that they're somewhat, or at least their posture and offering was somewhat anti the working class, where here we saw, or we heard a lot of protectionism of sorts, a conservative type of narrative. What's your take on all that criticism?
National policy, because that mainly really, there's nothing they can do around the working environment or the policy and regulatory environment that even municipalities have to contend with. Those should be a concern on national matters, really, because that's where national policies can be influenced at the level of the National Assembly. But people who are rightly concerned in the sense that it's not uncommon to see political parties that perceive their power in a particular local setting to want to bargain on particular national legislative matters. But I think that there's sense enough and there's diversity enough in ActionSA to try and have the outcome of policy outcomes that reflect not only its relationship with other political parties, but the internal dynamics within the party. Because in it, you have people who come from the liberal strand of politics, Congress politics, and so the combination of all of those factors and the practical choices each municipality faces will result in a more centrist and more pragmatic ActionSA than they may have postured during elections.
Mm-hmm. And then on Herman Mashaba himself, I mean, he says he's fine, he's more than willing to be a councillor. But do you see perhaps in Joburg, given his track record, perhaps him taking over the mayoral position?
I think we will see a situation where if Herman Mashaba cannot be a mayor, he will be very happy for any of his colleagues to take the seats in the various municipal councils. If he does take it because he wants to be committed to his word, I don't see him lasting in that role. I don't think he's the kind of politician who would sit quietly in opposition benches and, limit himself to operating within the mundane activities of council. I think that business imperatives will keep him outside and maybe leading the party, and some spin will be crafted of how it's strategic for him to remain at the level of the party while his colleagues are in the various municipal councils, so that he could drive the strategy for 2024 elections. As he said himself, that election is around the corner. So I doubt that he will want to be bogged down by being an ordinary councillor if he doesn't get the mayoral position. But I do want to give him a benefit of doubt that they will be open to not being in the executive or to not taking the mayoral position, as he has suggested in an interview with your channel yesterday.
Mm-hmm. And just in closing, we never got to speak to you on this one. Yesterday's briefing by the president, he characterized those that opted to stay at home and not vote as a grouping that was probably more sympathetic to the ANC somewhat, that they saw no alternative party. And perhaps next time they will give them that chance again. What's your take?
That's not uncommon. It's not a far-fetched thing, in the same way that the DA can actually claim that part of the turnout story in the Western Cape are disgruntled people who are not yet happy to shift political allegiances. So it's been a dominant narrative, even among us as political scientists, that part of the problem in South Africa is people who are no longer keen to vote for the ANC as far as the rest of the country is concerned, and as the DA has seen now in the Western Cape, but are no longer keen. They are no longer keen to vote for their preferred party, but at the same time, they don't see an alternative, and therefore they don't vote. Whether or not that those people will come back and vote for the ANC, President Cyril Ramaphosa is failing to read the reasons why those people are coming out in the first place. They see a party that's caught up in intractable factional battles, and that's failing to rise back to its values. And there's no evidence that the party is going to change from that trajectory. The 2022 election, internal election of the party, will be hotly contested, and that will, in my view, result in an environment in which compromises continue to be made, which preclude the party from reclaiming its values that it was known for in pre-democratic times.